Oh, we are alive. Welcome to yet another Ask Me Anything, Ask Us Anything. It's three of us today. Me, Darin, usual suspects, and Chris, which he will introduce himself in a second. And yeah, I was told I should tell you that you should like the video, subscribe, and consider, please, joining the channel. That really helps a lot. So with that out of the way, we have questions. We have a new member. MSW, etc. Thank you so much for becoming a member, joining the channel. We really appreciate it. And now let's introduce Chris and the subject. Before actually Chris explains who he is, he sent me an email kind of like, these are the things that I cover. And then I spent 15 minutes trying to figure out what will be the subject of this. And then I chose DevOps, because DevOps is everything and nothing, right? And Chris covers quite a few topics. So it's about everything, right? Now, Chris, who are you?
I'm Chris Weston. I work for Delta Dental in Michigan, and I'm one of the platform engineers there. I moved to the platform team from a developer role about 3 years ago, and we do a lot of on-prem cloud stuff, and we're starting to move our stuff into Azure for several projects and kind of come up with that hybrid cloud model.
You're muted.
I'm muted again. I need to remember to unmute myself. Okay, questions. Let's go into questions and see what we have today. Hello, how do we connect Elk to Grafana to view whether microservices is down or not? You want to take it or shall I?
I can take a stab at it. We use Elk where we're at, but I'm not sure why you would want to take it to Grafana. For microservices, Elk has a product called APM, application monitoring, that you can plug in to view your microservices. And then if you want to, you can use the Elastic alerts to send alerts if there's a service down and such. We use a multitude of tools we use mostly Elk for our logging console and some of the APM, and then we use Dynatrace to monitor some services as well.
And kind of, if you're using exclusively Elk, then kind of like there is K over there. I'm not sure why you would go for Grafana, right, in the first place. What would be interesting is if it's not only Elk, if you're using Elastic, but also Grafana and Datadog and this and that, if you have multiple sources, then Grafana is absolutely amazing. But you have K, you have Kibana over there. In the current state, do you still prefer and recommend Argo CD or Flux, or that has changed? Pretty sure that question is for me. So honestly, I go back and forth. One day I prefer Argo CD, another day I prefer Flux. And they're very similar. Kind of basically most of the features are available in both. And the reasons why I switch to one or the other are maybe not that important for majority of people. Like I like how Flux bootstraps itself. That's nicer than Argo CD, but it's not a big deal. I like how Argo CD is tracking child resources and doing that job slightly better than Flux. But then in some cases that does not really work if those resources are if parent resources in a namespace and spins up child resource that is cluster-wide and that breaks in Argo CD, and then I move to Flux and then back to Argo CD. But I honestly, if we ignore the missing UI, which by the way is awesome in Argo CD, and I think that there is a commercial version, but within open source, I don't think there is a web UI yet. So if we ignore the web UI either of the two is a good choice, really. It's probably one of the very few tools where I say both are great. I almost never do that. Hi team, is it worth appearing for CKA? Yes, I mean, I don't know. I think it kind of the value diminishes with years of experience. I think that would be my definition. I don't know what you think.
That's kind of the way I play it. I don't have my CKA, but I'm kind of saving it so I can use it for credits towards my CIS certification, because you get extra credits for getting a certification on that. But it will depend on your experience level. If you're new to the business and just trying to get in the field, then it can help. It can show your interest and show a little bit of desire to get in on things. But if you've been in the business and you're already established in your job and understand the concepts and things, I'm not sure what it'll really buy you as far as your employer goes.
I mean, there is what I'm going to say does not apply to me, but it could be also a structured way to learn things. In my case, structured ways do not work, but I guess that for some people it can.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, it helps if you're looking for a new job, or if you're a junior level looking to get into it. It's nice to go through the training and learn through things, and it gives you some experience too, because it's more of a hands-on thing than other certification courses that I've taken in the past.
Should I be using Gitpod for local environment and big cluster for ephemeral demo environment, or I just stick to one technology? I mean, unless my brain stopped functioning, Gitpod is not really for local environments. Gitpod is for remote development environments, right? It's running somewhere else. And they serve very different purpose, right? Virtual cluster gives you a different way to create a fully operational cluster, right? So instead of creating a physical cluster, you create a virtual cluster. Gitpod gives you IDE in a browser and an environment ready for an application, which is not necessarily the same as cluster, right? Because that environment is for that specific application, right? So they serve different purposes, really. One is a cluster, the other one is remote set of tools, an environment that you need for an application, right? I cannot say which one you should use, probably both. I mean, something like vCluster is something like, I'm not saying vCluster, is actually used behind the scenes for Gitpod as well. Is there a significant cloud cost savings by implementing Kubernetes? You wanna go? If I will be very nasty if I go first.
Well, it depends. It depends on how you approach that and what you run on that Kubernetes cluster, the size of it, how you manage it, several things. So I've seen it go both ways, where it could be savings, but it also cost a lot of money because the way the implementation was done. I'm sure you kind of feel the same way.
It truly depends, I believe, on how you use it. So if you do use Kubernetes, to begin with, it depends greatly, savings, whether you're using it in cloud or on-prem. Because if you talk about savings as in hardware savings, you don't have hardware savings on-prem, right? You have servers. Now, you can have savings because if it can scale up and down and then free resources for some other workloads in some other team and stuff like that, but not that much, right? But the savings would be really related to scaling ability. Your applications can scale up and down, and your clusters and nodes can scale up and down. And then you can basically, instead of having a fixed amount of resources, they're fluctuating. and you're paying for what you use, right? But I would definitely not. I would not approach and adopt Kubernetes as with savings being the main motivator, because if all you're trying to get out of Kubernetes is to save some money, then the amount of money you will lose setting it up, maintaining, and learning about it, and so on and so forth is going to be higher, right? At least initially. So Kubernetes is amazing. Everybody should be using it, but don't go for Kubernetes because you can save a bit of money. You can probably save by not doing anything. Oh, if I answer this, I will be very. My answer will be very subjective because I work with a product that could be considered competing with Terraform. But anyways, the question is, how do you keep your Terraform plan's desired state in sync with your actual state? Do you use Terraform?
We were just getting into the ability to use Terraform recently. And it's not a fully automated solution yet. There's still some manual intervention where we do the Terraform apply and such. So I think my answer would probably be in sync with yours, in opinionated like yours. Actually, maybe even use a tool like, I'll say a Crossplane in the Terraform provider, along with somewhere to store your state like Artifactory or something like that.
Yeah, so you need to. There is the simple answer is you need to keep the state in a remote drive, assuming that that Terraform is used by more than one person. The problem is the state itself. Terraform state becomes very complicated to manage proportionally with the number of people or processes using it. Right? With one person, no problem at all. With two people, a bit more issues. 10 people, more issues, and so on and so forth. Eventually, I think the Terraform state will be moved to something else, but we are not there yet. And if the question is so I'm not 100% sure what's the question, whether the question is really about Terraform state, or the question is the process itself. If it's the process itself, I would prefer doing it old-fashioned. I mean, not old-fashioned, but doing it like always, pipelines executed when you make a change to a Git repository, and those pipelines execute Terraform apply or Terraform plan. If it's a pull request, then it's Terraform plan. If it's merging to the main line, then Terraform apply. I'm not 100% convinced about the GitHub story with Terraform. It can work. To begin with, all GitHub tools are Kubernetes-based tools, so it can work in that way as well. But then we get into all sorts of problems. Then you need to adopt some of the Terraform operators. I think that there is one in vworks. There is one by kubevela. There are a few others, I think. But it doesn't really work as it should over there, simply because it's not designed to do that.
Let me jump in.
Sure.
The way I read this is, it sounds like people are still pointing and clicking or creating other things outside of Terraform. That's what I'm reading this. And then how do I backfill that into the state?
Oh.
That's how I read it, which is
kind of like, how do you convert existing resources, like real resources, into Terraform?
Sort of. So I started out with Terraform. I had all my other stuff done. And then people didn't want to do Terraform or didn't know how to, so they still kept on pointing and clicking, and I want to be able to backfill whatever was pointed and clicked into my state. And there are some tools and I'm drawing a blank on all the names that will backfill that for you. But I don't know how great they are because I haven't tried them out. I mean, because that's a way to read the question.
The thing is that, and this is, I'm not answering now specifically for Terraform, but in more general terms, and maybe I was unlucky. But whenever I used a tool that would generate some code based on some existing something, that code was that something was harder to maintain than writing it from scratch. And I think that somehow applies to Terraform as well. This is not Terraform only. This is for almost all the tools, because usually you get, something you would write in 20 lines of HCR or YAML or Go or Python or whatever. You get thousands of lines of stuff, and it just works, which is great. But then when you need to maintain it, when you need to modify it, you run into real issues. How to contribute to open source effectively? Slack. It's really I'm not sure from which direction to take it. Almost all, first of all, there is no kind of established method. Hey, this works with every open source community. They're all very different. But what most of them have in common is that issues are in GitHub, communication is in Slack, and just pick up a random issue. It's important. It's always an issue, and start writing comments about what you think about it and what you're planning to do. The important thing is almost never to just create a pull request, because that often leads to disappointment. Kind of, hey, I just spent 5 days working on this. I created a pull request, and then people are not reviewing it. People do not want it, and so on and so forth. So I would say that for every hour you invest in open source, there is at least one more hour or more of chatting with people and figuring out why that is open, why nobody picked it so far, what needs to be done, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's no different than when you're developing in-house, where you want to have a few conversations with everybody and understand the use cases and get everybody's input on it as to whether or not it should fit in there. That way you kind of don't waste your time just throwing something out there that nobody will ever use.
Or even worse, that will affect something else that you're not aware of, but you would be if you just spoke.
Yeah.
We'll let Darin jump into this if he wants to.
I can. Any reason why you shouldn't use Jenkins? No. There's no reason. That's my short answer. It depends on what you're doing. Right? If all you need to do is run a simple thing and you're already inside of GitHub or GitLab, where there are some built-in tools, GitHub Actions or GitLab CI, and what you're doing is just simple, you might not need to mix in Jenkins, especially if you are an individual developer. But if you are doing things that are a little more complex or you're working inside of a team, that's where Jenkins can come and help out a little bit more. And by team, meaning you've got to integrate with fill in the blank number of different tools. You can do that with the other tool that I mentioned, and there's plenty of other tools out there the same way, but pick the tool that works best for you. Try to minimize the number of tools you're working with, just like if you're working as an electrician or a carpenter. Use the right number of tools. So, can anybody help me out of this hole that I'm digging, please?
Oh,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, pick a tool, and it's going to depend on what your task is, how big, how many services you need to deploy, or how big your development teams are and such. If it's very simple, it may not be needed, but it doesn't take much to where you do need a tool like that to organize those things and start to leverage things in a standard way.
There you go. So I have a customer with DRC requirements, like they want everything to be duplicated from the prod, data, and database and services. What is the set of tools and architecture you suggest? What is DRC? My brain blank.
Disaster recovery.
Disaster. I mean, you should actually have everything not duplicated but replicated, if you ask me. Now, I'm going to, if I ignore now on-prem challenges, right? You should have run things in 3 data centers, so that failure of one is not causing the failure of majority of stuff, of servers, of control planes, or what's not. Yes, data should be duplicated as well, and databases should be replicated and should be duplicating data between instances and so on and so forth. And that's one of the reasons why we use Kubernetes. And that's one of the reasons why databases, why only databases should be stateful and your applications should be stateless. What I don't, and I suspect that this question is going in a different direction than what I'm saying, like everything should be replicated. If the question is that you should have active, passive, everything duplicated, then the answer is a huge no if you can avoid it. I don't like the idea of having a second data center with everything duplicated on standby waiting in case of first data center going down. To me, that's a huge waste, amazingly huge waste. But if we're talking about having multiple data centers, clusters spinning across those data centers, and all the applications are running in, let's say, 3 replicas, and data being shared between those applications and being exclusively, hopefully, in a database, then the huge answer is yes.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The problem comes into play is you get across with the database and the amount of data that needs to be synchronized. You end up with timing issues and sometimes cost issues as far as that goes, having that type of setup.
I mean, I guess it depends on...
It depends on your SLA.
The problem with databases is that often it's too complicated and it requires too much effort to change the database. Mm-hmm. So you might be stuck with something, which I'm not going to name, that simply does not have replication baked in. And then you're in deep trouble, right? But almost all modern databases can run in a replicated state, assuming that you can afford it. Is it advisable to use same domain subdomains for staging prod QA environments which are public? I don't know of any security risks. I'm assuming, Chris, that this question is kind of like staging.acme.com and then prod.acme.com, different subdomains with the same domain.
Yeah. I don't see any reason why that, and I don't see where security risks would come into play unless you're exposing something in a lower environment that you're, to the outside world that you shouldn't be. That would be my concern with that.
Yeah, I'm guessing that the question is more towards if I am exposing to public, which is not the question, should they use different domains or different subdomains? And as long as you're generating TLS certificates and encrypting the traffic, that doesn't make a difference. Or at least I cannot think of a difference why it would be any different, really. what are your thoughts on serverless functions versus Kubernetes? Are there any good tools focused on serverless? Now, there is a tiny problem with this question. Is that the first question says serverless functions, and the second one says serverless. And not all serverless are serverless functions. To clarify. So I will assume that we are talking about serverless in general, right? And if you're talking about serverless in general, many of them are using Kubernetes, which you might or might not see. So here's the story. If you want to have serverless something, right, what do you need behind the scenes? You need an API. You need a control plane that will figure out where to run, when to instantiate something. And you need to control traffic and so on and so forth. Those are the things that Kubernetes does. Not necessarily the best choice or the worst choice, but that's what Kubernetes does. If you look at Azure Container Apps, that's serverless. That's using Kubernetes. If you look at Google Container Run, that's serverless, based on Knative API, not using Kubernetes in case of GCR, but if you implement it yourself, then you would be implementing it in Kubernetes. Lambda, on the other hand, is using VMs, but it still has Kubernetes-like mechanism behind the scenes. You still need a control plane that will figure out what to do, when to do it, how to do it, monitor it, and so on and so forth. So I think it's more a question of whether you see Kubernetes behind it. First of all, not all of them are using Kubernetes, but if you would be managing it yourself, instead of using it as a service, then you're most likely going to use Kubernetes. If you're using it as a service, then you don't know what's behind the scenes, what's powering those, and you don't care.
Yeah, I have not had a chance to dip into the serverless side yet.
But it's kind of, think of it this way. If you go to a service and say, hey, run this application as serverless or whatever, right? As a service. So you don't know, you don't care what's behind that something, whether it's Kubernetes or no, at that point. Because you're just consuming a service, like Lambda. For all I know, Lambda could be Kubernetes behind the scenes, or maybe it's not. I mean, it's not, but it could be, right? And you still wouldn't care. And I think that that's the future where we are going. That I believe that we will be seeing less and less of Kubernetes, not more and more. I'm 100% convinced of that. You will be seeing less and less of Kubernetes. Kubernetes will be powering more and more things, but you will be seeing it less and less.
I tend to agree with that as well. That's why you're going out and getting a managed service, is so you don't have to worry about what's under the covers.
Exactly. Or even if you're talking about on-prem, right? What is happening everywhere, including on-prem, is more and more adoption of internal developer platforms, ops people exposing things as services. So even if you're on-prem, a developer in there might be saying, hey, I want to deploy this application, and it goes through some interface, whatever is provided. And again, that person might not be aware whether it's Kubernetes behind the scenes or no. It's becoming irrelevant.
Why don't you go ahead and do your bottom of the hour commercial before we
Oh, yes.
go on?
Please like this video. That's free. Subscribe to the channel. Free still. And then join the channel, please. That's not free. That's the price of a coffee every month. But it helps us keep the lights on. Keep the expenses on a bearable level.
Okay, this next one is a two-part question. So you ready for the first one?
Okay.
Well, it's
let's
not really
go.
two-part, but it's two items. Here we go.
How to deploy remotely on a Docker Swarm. We use Docker Swarm for 3 nodes, on-premise deployment, 60 gigabyte RAM each node. You want to take it or shall I? I will be very negative towards Swarm.
Yeah, you can have this one. I never got to work with Swarm.
Yeah. So
Straight to Kubernetes.
look, for 3 nodes on-premise deployment, Swarm is a great choice. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Swarm was a great choice. It's small, it doesn't use much resources, it is easy, it is brilliant. The problem with Swarm is that it's dead. Nobody is maintaining Swarm, nobody is working on Swarm, nobody is seriously working on Swarm, and so on and so forth. So I would change that question, or the answer to that question, instead of answering directly, say you need to get away from Swarm. That could be Docker itself without Swarm. Or it could be K3S, maybe it's very lightweight, or some managed service or something. But really, nobody is investing in Swarm. There is no support from vendors. There is no development of it, nothing. It's dead. Please go away. Go somewhere else. For your own benefits, really. What is the preferred tool for secret management with Kubernetes? I'm using HashiCorp Vault in my lab, but wondering what is the option most large companies are taking now for this. Vault. Vault is omnipresent. I don't know your experience, Chris, but whenever I got in contact with some bigger company, it's always Vault.
We leverage Vault where we're at, and it's good stuff.
It's kind of
easy.
Very few tools we have today that almost completely dominate that segment of the market. Kind of, Vault is everywhere. I mean, there are smaller companies I know that are not using Vault, and you might want to go with Vault equivalent as a managed service in AWS, Google, or Azure, whatever they're called. But if you're self-managing Vault, don't think about it. Are there DevOps internships for freshers? How do I know that I'm ready for an internship? Let me think. So, yeah, if the question is whether companies accept internships, the answer is yes. How do you know you're ready? I mean, you are ready for internship. Internship is all about not being ready. If you're ready to take a real job, then you wouldn't be talking about internship.
Right.
So you are ready.
It's whether or not you're going to like it or not once you get there.
That's, yeah.
And at the same time, if that's your career, we've got some good people that we hired that did come through as interns earlier than that, not only for DevOps, for several positions. So when you do your internship, try to pick a company that you might want to go to work for.
What else? What do we have? How do I automate update launch of template with newer image created by AWS Image Builder? I have no idea. I don't know if Chris, I have never used beyond 15 minutes AWS Image Builder.
I have not either.
No answer. Unless Darin just pops out of nowhere and says, I'm AWS Builder Ninja. No? None of us used it. Sorry for that. For an IDP, how do we start prioritizing what are the initial building blocks to focus on? I cannot give an answer kind of like this is the block 7. But it's a general rule, which is not really exclusive to IDP. You want to see what are the main pain points, right? What are the things that developers are asking somebody else to do, and the results in them waiting for too long, and saturating that somebody with too much work. Now, whether that's okay, this is how we deploy. Now, actually, when I think about it, go with applications first, infrastructure later, because infrastructure changes much less frequently, right? Developer is going to deploy, to test, to do operations on applications every single day. A developer will not potentially create a cluster frequently or upgrade a cluster or something like that. So applications. Start with deployment if you have no better idea. Or to be more precise, start with deployment. Afterwards, move maybe to how we can define applications in the first place. But that also doesn't happen often.
I tend to agree, but from our DevOps hat that we wear, you really got to look at the process from start to finish and find where your pain points are for your developers, talk to them, listen to them. And, the whole point of the DevOps is to automate things and speed up that development process from start to finish. And a lot of times that's where you can focus on where you should start, and based on whether or not you're redoing a legacy system versus starting from scratch makes a big difference as well. If you have a legacy system, try to pick the things that give you the best business value out of the process and work smaller increments up to where you want to be.
I want to go one step further.
Uh-huh.
If you're still using Subversion, that's where you need to
Leave
start.
the company.
Well,
No. If you're still using Subversion, there is nothing you need to start doing. You need to quit the company right now while streaming. Go somewhere else.
I mean, that's one thing that we actually don't talk about a whole lot on IDPs. It's source code, because we think it's a solved problem, but it's not. In a lot of
it's
places.
not at all. I think
Issues and source control. That's really where it starts. And I think that's one thing that people don't talk enough about. There's plenty of good options, but that's where you should start, I think. All right, this question that I'm putting up now is one that we need to do on the podcast. But let's see how you think about this.
Yeah. It will be called differently. That's my answer. It was called differently before DevOps. Names of roles are changing all the time. It was sysadmin and ops and DevOps, and tomorrow it will be called something else. But there will always be a need for a person who has deep understanding of services and tooling and writing code and so on and so forth, right? So I had a similar question a long time ago when it was related to, hey, how do you see sysadmins in relation to us moving to cloud, for example? And the answer is still the same. It still exists. It will continue existing. The area that a person covers might be different. Tools are going to change and so on and so forth. But it will just be called differently. That's all. Somebody clever will come up with a new catchy name for I manage tools, services, servers, and what's not.
And I see the DevOps role expanding past just developers, just past the internal developer platform into even more automated solutions for policy and various things around the organization that will really help out. It's the same concept, looking for deficiencies and figuring out automation and creating services that the users can consume.
What's your take on Kubernetes secrets? They're not secretive. They're not secrets. Everybody with access to a cluster can discover a secret. There are minor differences between secrets and config maps. Not significant, right? So they're not very. We do need secrets, just to clarify, because that's how applications pods in the Kubernetes cluster read them and what's not. But nobody should be managing secrets directly. That's why we have Vault and operators in clusters that convert Vault something into whatever the application needs. And I think that brings to me like more important point, and which I think applies equally to secrets, but also to networking, to storage, and so on and so forth. None of the things that exist in Kubernetes was designed to be used directly or to serve any particular need, except to be a blueprint for solutions that are going to extend on it and be the solutions we use. You're not supposed to use directly Kubernetes networking. You're not supposed to use directly storage in Kubernetes that is baked into Kubernetes before, when it was baked. Now it's even removed, and so on and so forth. So most of the Kubernetes resource types that come out of the box are primitives that shouldn't be used directly, and that applies to secrets.
Yeah. Go ahead. Next question.
You want to take this one, or shall I? Kubernetes CPU limits recommended or not?
Go ahead and take this one.
Yeah, they're definitely less useful than memory requests and limits to begin with. And yes, they lead to, they behave differently, right? Because memory is more about how much memory will be assigned to that something, and then if it reaches the limit, it's kicked out, while CPU, when it reaches the limit, it starts getting throttling, right? So it's not perfect, and definitely less valuable than memory quotas. But if you're getting into a situation that you're getting throttled, that means that you're reaching the limits frequently, and that means that you did not set them correctly. And you should always be reviewing them anyways. And now it depends really on whether we are talking about application that can scale horizontally. If it can, then you should be scaling your application, increase the number of replicas before you reach the limits, before the throttling starts. And if it's not scalable application, then maybe you want to experiment with VPA and have a dynamic process that will be changing your limits, including CPU. And this also goes back to previous comment. CPU and memory settings are really not that good in the first place. They're mostly meant for other tools like HPA, VPA, what's not. And you should be using something else, like maybe metrics from Prometheus instead. Oh, in my country is going to be very different than in Chris's and Darin's country.
Well, and even within the country, based on what region you're in, is going to be very different. I think that's one thing that people think everything's the same in the U.S., and it's not even close. The area of the country that Chris lives in, I'll let you speak for yourself, but it's not comparable to San Francisco.
Not at all.
Or New York or Chicago. Neither is mine.
Neither is the cost of living, too, and that has a big factor into it.
Exactly. I wish there was an easy answer, but I don't think there is. And
but
also, which industry that you're in, too. Right? Because if you're...
Correct me if I'm... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a gap, let's say, within United States, and the gap is even bigger, United States as a whole and Europe, kind of like...
Correct.
65K, that sounds actually like like a good salary in France, it would be in Spain it would be even lower, and 65K in most cases, in most places in US, you would be considered low, right?
That would be about 70,000 US dollars
Yeah.
at today's trading. So that would be pretty, for 6 years, that would be pretty low. I think anywhere in the US, that would be, it would be on the low end of low. Excuse me, high end of low. So if you think low, medium, and high, that's the high end of low. Does that make any sense? Because I would think probably after 6 years, that would probably be in the 90 to 120 US. Just round numbers.
Exactly. And in Europe, actually, if you go over 6 digits, I mean, of course, within Europe also there are huge differences, like France and Hungary, very different. But if I generalize it, if you come to 6 figures, you are kind of like, wow, amazing.
Something that might be interesting over the next few years is the effect of the remote work and how that affects salaries. Companies can now hire somebody to work remotely at a lower rate just because of where their location's at. And I'm wondering if that'll have an effect over a period of time on the whole industry.
I think it must. Because if you think about it, if you have a company where most people are remote, your pool of people is global to begin with, not local. And also the pool of companies you can work for is also global, not local anymore. And I personally, for example, I do not accept anymore kind of like, hey, because you live in Spain, why the heck do you care that I work in Spain if it's remote position? So I think that it will be normalizing over time. What about custom controllers and operator development with things like KubeBuilder?
I like KubeBuilder.
KubeBuilder is awesome. It's easy, straightforward, right? It's not the kind of you don't need to spend months trying to figure it out and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it'll stub out all the code for you, and basically you just have to really focus on 2 areas. The reconciliation part and your spec. And
that's the thing, and I would like to hear your take on it, Chris. But I think that actually controllers and operators are going to become essential, probably the most important outcome of what we do, meaning that since it's becoming easier and easier to create controllers with their corresponding CRDs, you as a person on the right side of life cycle of an application, you can finally tell everybody else on the left side, developers, hey, this is how you define application. No need for you to think about deployments and stateful sets and ingresses or VPCs and subnets and this and that, kind of like controllers and not controllers, but CRDs behind those controllers will be becoming increasingly more and more the preferable interface how people in a company consume something, whatever that something is, whether that's a cluster, whether that's application or what's not.
I absolutely agree. The problem is a lot of DevOps teams, they want to stick to straight tooling and try to retrofit that. And when they hear that somebody's developing a controller or something, they can get nervous thinking there's new code and things introduced. In reality, what you're doing is you're trying to shift that complexity into the controller. That way you're simplifying what you're allowing your users to do. Like you said, this is how a deployment goes. You're making it simpler. And all these tools that we're using, the Argo CD, all those things, Crossplane, they're leveraging that, extending the Kubernetes API and basically simplifying the process of creating some type of resource.
It's also in a way moving the moving the complexity from laptops into servers,
Hmm.
which is a story I like a lot. Like a few days ago, I got a question, hey, what do you think about YAML? Sorry, not YAML, Helm. And I liked it in the past. Now I don't like it anymore because if it's something is so complex on your laptop that you need Helm, then maybe you should actually create a controller and make that something, all that complexity to the cluster.
Yeah,
Must be simple.
It's much easier to just apply a Kubernetes manifest with a little bit of, the information you need in the spec, as opposed to maintain a huge bash script and put it into some pipeline and all the different complexities that come with that.
Ooh, and Sebastian just became a member. Thanks, Sebastian. Really appreciate it. Really, 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 really. Thanks so much. I haven't used Kayenta, so I have no idea.
That's the first time I've seen that word.
What I will say, at the risk of sounding being wrong, is that me not hearing about Kayenta more often is not necessarily a good sign. Fun one. If you were to pick one skill, tool, technology that will have compounding effect in the years on this fast-changing landscape to come, what would that be? Go.
I would pick Argo, the whole Argo ecosystem. If you had to pick one tool, and
That's 3 tools. You're cheating.
Well, it's all underneath the same umbrella. That's what makes it nice. It plays nice.
Yeah.
I have an answer.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist yet.
Okay.
Or it's still in stealth. One or the other. I don't think, based on how he says it, in the years to come, I'm finishing out, in the years to come, looking beyond 5 years, I don't think that tool exists yet. It's not shipped yet. I should put it that way.
Yeah, if it's 5 years, then yes, that's now becoming. You're right. That's kind of such a increasingly long period of time now for the pace with which we're going. But I will say this: within next 5 years, it will still be based on Kubernetes, whatever that is. Oh, Taina, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but thank you so much for joining the channel. Really appreciate it. Is Helm still a good option today? If you don't use... So here's the thing. And I will let Chris give his 2 cents in a second. For third-party applications, Helm is almost unavoidable. It's kind of... That's how... MongoDBs and Postgreses and Jenkinses and Argo CDs and so on and so forth are defined. There is no discussion. You have to use it right. For your applications, I personally prefer customize. And the reason is relatively simple. When you deal with third-party applications, those third-party applications need to give you infinite number of permutations because there is infinite number of potential customers, right? So the way what somebody needs from MongoDB is different than somebody else, and so on and so forth. So, and templating there is almost necessary evil. Even though I think that, and I'm talking about third-party applications that did not yet transform it themselves into controllers and operators and so on and so forth. But for your own applications, you don't have that many permutations. You shouldn't have. And then, to me, customize is much more elegant solution to use when we're talking about client-side transformations.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to develop third-party, Helm is the answer. It's pretty much a standard. And again, depending on how many parameters and different options that you have to offer, that values file could really grow, and that would simplify things. As far as Helm and customize internally, it really depends on the use case and how you're doing your deployments, whether you just have a handful of deployments or if you're managing, several hundred services. Sometimes Helm comes into play because there's little nuances in those services where you can get away with one type of Helm chart to flow everything through and then add some conditionals in there based on what's coming through. So I tend to lean more towards Helm for that. Just especially with a team that's learning and working, it's almost easier to keep less pieces to the puzzle and less things to learn. So just don't make it overly complex.
How do you apply GitOps principles when using Vault? You don't. As far as I know. The question is really,
Kind of.
does GitOps really apply to data? And could we qualify secrets as data just as... is there a real essential difference between secrets in Vault and data in Postgres?
There's
There's
a little bit of difference. I'm looking at the question as far as apply GitOps principles when using Vault. It makes me wonder if they're looking for a way to get the Vault secrets, into a deployment via a pipeline. So there's several pieces out there. There's a product that I forget the name of the repo, but there's a Vault operator out there which you can leverage to set up a Vault cluster that will actually create the secrets for you. And you can use Argo and a GitOps approach for that. And also you have the Argo Vault plugin, which is also a good tool to use to connect to Vault and pass your secrets along to your deployments in a GitOps fashion. So if that's what the question is, there are tools and ways to go about getting those values into your clusters.
And we're almost at the top of the hour. Did you have somewhere else to be?
I don't know. Let me see.
You should probably check, since there's only less than 4 minutes till the top of the hour.
Yeah. No, actually I don't.
Oh, you don't today? Okay. Well, we'll still wrap up though. Let me see here. Here, let's let this be the last question for today, from the Computer Cat. Here you go.
Isn't this what... So, and correct me if I'm wrong or you think differently, but the whole movement towards DevOps is so that people can be focusing more on developing solutions than doing tasks that tend to require context switching, right? Like fulfilling requests. Hey, this database, I need a database. Hey, I need to upgrade this. Hey, I need this, I need that. Requires a lot of context switching. What we are trying to do now, I mean, in the past as well, but now more often, is, no, I'm developing sort of services that you can consume through automation, through some portals, through platforms, whatever that something is, right? So I'm focusing more on developing those services, and that by definition requires less context switching and less on day-to-day operations, which tend to be chaotic and require switches. You're muted now. This time it's you.
No.
Now it's fine. Now I hear you.
I tend to agree. When you're creating services for the developers, you're trying to speed up the process so they can focus on what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be, writing code, building it, and they can hand it off to your internal development platform, and that gives them the visibility to carry things through all the way out to production. But what you want to do is, like you said, you want to create services and give them the ability to do that themselves. Because if they have to put in a ticket and get manager approval for some type of resource and such, that takes time away from their process. So anytime you can give them that magic button that will automate that process for them, that's where you're adding value to what you're doing. And that will reduce the amount of context switching in there. A lot of times too, there's a lot going on from a DevOps perspective. You have the visibility of seeing a lot more than a lot of the other positions within a company. So yeah, that can be difficult to manage, trying to keep focus on what's important. So the more you can automate it and give your developers the ability to have to perform those functions on their own, you're better off, and that'll reduce the amount of switching back and forth that you need to do.
I think that's it. That was the last one. Until 2 weeks from now. Remember, sub, join. There we go. Sub, join, like the video. And huge thanks to Chris. Thank you for joining. If anybody else wants to join, just let us know.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a little different than watching the show, where as soon as you answer, you're like, whoop, now your opinion.
Hey, it's different on the other side, always.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Darin, come in, wave at people.
Oh, bye.
Get in front of the camera.
Cheers,
There we go.
everyone.